Welcome, everyone. It is 3:01, so we will go ahead and get started. Please silence your cell phones if you have it in. And I have here with us Ms. Carol Gravens from the St. Louis Masters Garden Speakers Bureau, and I will let Ms. Carol give you more information about herself.
Thank you. Okay, who am I? I have been a master gardener for 20 plus years and also a master naturalist for probably 20. And in my retirement, I got a degree in horticulture. I'm a retired microbiologist, so that's what I did for my professional career. And I did a lot of public speaking in my professional career, and so I really enjoy it. I love the people I meet. And so I've just taken it on to different topics. I've always been a gardener. My mother and dad were gardeners. I mean, how could you not love plants? At least that's what I think. So, today we're going to talk about plants that change the course of history. If you have problems hearing me or you want me to stop and go slower, faster, let me know. Anything, I want you to maximize the experience. So I represent St. Louis Master Gardener Speakers Bureau. We're all volunteers. And as such, we go out to various groups like yours in the community, and we give talks. And I think I have about 20 now. So I can talk on many different subjects. This one happens to be my most popular talk. I think this is the third time in about 10 days I've done it. I took this talk, a subset. I'm not going to keep you for 50 plants, but I did it. It's a subset of this book. I was at the Chicago Botanic Garden, and of course, when you're at these botanic gardens, you always go in their wonderful gift shops. So I moseyed in the gift shop, and I saw this book. I thought, well, that's interesting, so I bought it. And I thought, this would really be interesting for a general information, a general interest group who maybe they don't know anything about gardening, doesn't make any difference. So I bought the book and I put the talk together. And what's nice about this is that you can add and subtract talks. You can make I've taught it as a class, and like a 2.5-hour class, and then I just throw some more plants in, what have you. So I like to keep my talks at about an hour. But it does come from this book by Bill Laws. Okay, did you ever think about this? Where would Earth be without plants? Isn't that a sobering thought? So, what do plants do for us? So plants make life possible here on Earth. So they absorb carbon dioxide. They release oxygen. They provide us with fuel, food, shelter, clothing, and medicines. And they control land erosion. So there are about 400,000 types of plants on Earth. Another sobering thought. According to Dr. Peter Wise Jackson, the president of Missouri Botanical Garden, 100,000 are endangered. That's 25%. And then you wonder, what are we destroying that we could be a wonderful new medicine or food or what have you? We don't even know what we're missing here. So they've colonized the Earth about 470 million years. So, how old is the Earth? Plants have been there 470 million years old, so how old is the Earth? Any guesses? Nobody? 4.5 billion. So it was just a rock for a long time, right? So, first of all, let's talk about ferns. So, ferns originated on Earth about 335 million years ago. You're going to hear a lot of million years, 1,000 years, or what have you in this talk. So kind of think a long time. It's hard to put that in perspective sometimes. So to put that in perspective, humans branched away from other primates 4 million years ago. There was one supercontinent at the time called Pangaea. Everything was flat and swampy, and so gigantism was the rule. So these ferns are 30 feet high, so they're like trees today. So eventually they were composted into peat and then further compressed into soil. So I think a lot of times we think about the peat bogs in Ireland and used as fuel, so they cut out these cubes of peat and burn them. Now, coal, little mining was done until Roman times. In the 1700s, trade in black gold became very big business, and it drove the Industrial Revolution, which roughly took place in the second half of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century. So it turned America from a wilderness into a superstate. It's done the same for China. One of the prime causes, however, of climate change. So in the 1780s, James Watts invents the steam engine. Now, he's a Scotsman. He's a mechanical engineer and a chemical engineer and an inventor. And he invents the steam engine. And then in that same decade, George Stephenson, who is a Brit, and he's also a mechanical engineer and a chemical engineer. So he takes Watts' steam engine and he puts it into locomotives. So now we have steam locomotives. And when you think of it, okay, that's in the 1780s. It took until 1869 until in this country we had the Transcontinental Railroad, where they're merged east and west in Utah when they drove the Golden Spike into the ground. So it took a few years. All these things take time, right? And strip mining, I mean, rape of the landscape is the best way I can describe it. Look at this little piece of equipment. Looks like a matchbox car. Did any of your sons play with matchbox cars when they were little? I know mine did too. That thing's probably about 3 stories high, and it looks like a matchbox car there. So you get some idea of the scope of this. So, Wyoming is where this occurs. The largest scale coal mining in the world, home of 9 of 10 of the country's largest coal mines. Mines increased greatly in size in the 1970s. And I know I live in Glendale, about a mile from the railroad tracks. And if you get stuck by that train, they're going coal in, coal out, empty out, coal in, empty out. And it's going to that Ameren plant in Levity, Missouri. We heard a lot about that recently, that it was the second most polluting plant in the country. So, we get a lot of water and air pollution from coal, things that look like this. And there's also a connotation in art. So Monet in 1904 paints London Obscured, and the translation of French is the sun's hole through the fog. That is not fog, that's pollution from coal burning. A little closer to home, St. Louis, Black Tuesday, November 28, 1939. This is what it looked like at noon. Can you believe that? The street lights are on, that man is holding a handkerchief to his face because he can't breathe. Sometimes it takes an event like this to change public opinion. And I think this is one that did. We were burning at that time that soft bituminous Illinois coal. And this is what happened. But then what also happened in 1939? World War II begins in Europe. So it got put on the back burner, the cleanup. So it really wasn't until we got in 41, so it wasn't until the late 40s and the 50s until we started cleaning up our air here, and more natural gas was burned rather than coal at that point. Papyrus, this is a pretty evident one because papyrus gives us paper. And now we can record history. We don't have to chisel in stone anymore. So papyrus grew in the Nile Delta until the droughts of the 11th century. And it was first dredged from the Nile Delta around 3000 before the Common Era, BCE. The key ingredient is cellulose, and that is what gives plants their strength and pliancy. It's a polysaccharide that's found in the cell walls of plants. So then they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they date to the 3 centuries BCE and the 1st century of the Common Era, and they were discovered in the 1940s and 50s in caves over in the Middle East. I think they're still finding some. You still read about some being found in caves over there, but when you think of how long that lasted, it's pretty amazing. Okay, the olive. I think these olive trees are so beautiful. As a young woman, I took a trip through Europe, and I just can remember these in Spain, and thinking I was so awed by these olive trees because they last forever and ever and ever. So the olive, of course, gives us olive oil, Grecian gold. And olives are 20% oil. 99% of the crop does go into oil. First, the fruit is macerated. Then they remove the stones. And the pulp is pressed cold for virgin olive oil. So when you read that label and it says first cold press, that's your premier olive oil, and that's what you want to use in your cooking or in your salads or what have you. But there's still some left, so they do hot pressings. They heat it, and that gives lesser grade oils. And then after that, what's left goes into soap, into pumice. But it's a closed system, so they don't have to use coal or other fuels. So the stones are burned for heat to process the next batch. So the olive stones or the pits are the fuel, the processing fuel. There's an artistic connection with olives with Van Gogh, and he painted many beautiful paintings of olive groves. So, olives were first cultivated in the Mediterranean region more than 5,000 years ago, powered up the city-state of Athens, which gave us democracy, the Olympic Games, the Parthenon, and a taste for the arts. The Greeks introduced olive trees throughout the Mediterranean region, and Europeans transported seedlings across the globe in the 15th century, which was the age of exploration, when all of those Europeans they thought they might go off, that the earth was flat, maybe they were going to fall off of it. And it's kind of like space exploration today, where we really don't know what's out there, and they didn't know what was on the other side of the world. And then there's a connotation of olives with peace. So in the Great Flood, Noah's dove returned to the ark with an olive branch, so he knew that the flood was ending. During the American Revolution, the olive branch was seen as a symbol of peace. So in 1775, the Continental Congress wrote this olive branch petition and sent it to the King of England in order to try to avert all-out war. Of course, it didn't work, and we got into the Revolutionary War. And the flag of the United Nations depicts the world seen from the North Pole, and those are olive branches around the earth. So I think that's a very interesting fact, something I certainly didn't know. Wine grape. So it originated 60 million years ago, the grape, in Western Asia. Wines have been made for at least 5,500 years, and winemaking may have originated in Iran, or even before that in Turkey or Georgia, as long as 7,500 years ago. Egyptians claimed wine as the tears of the god Horus. So it was made in China, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. It was the universal drink of Southern Europe before tea and coffee. So children were weaned on wine. And we might find that shocking, but when you think maybe their water was not terribly clean, so, with the alcohol in, maybe that was a good thing. I don't know.
Happy children.
I'm sorry?
Happy children.
Yeah, happy children, right. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they diluted it, who knows. By the mid-17th century, we had the advent of the cork and the bottle. So now we have greater transportability and we have a longer shelf life, two great advantages for wine. In the 1860s, this insect phylloxera, which looks like this, devastated the European vineyards. Took a century to recover. At the same time, we had Europeans immigrating here to Missouri, the Germans immigrating along the Missouri River near Herman. They were in Herman. And this is what the destruction looks like, by the way. So, what did they do? The European scions, the cuttings from the European grapes, were shipped over here and grafted on the rootstocks of the Native American grape, which was resistant to this phylloxera. So Missouri saved the European wine industry. And before Prohibition, Missouri was once the leading wine-producing state. It's probably California now. So today, vintners worldwide make 30 billion bottles a year. It's a $100 billion business. And then there's a connotation of wine with Christianity. So in the Eucharistic ritual, wine represents the blood of Christ. And the marriage feast at Cana was Jesus' first miracle, where he changed water to wine at his mother's bequest because the host was running out. Medieval monasteries perfected the art of winemaking, so the church actually developed the wine industry. Okay, what do we get from the white willow? This one's a little more esoteric. Anybody a scientist here? No? We get aspirin. So, it's extracted from the bark of the white willow. Bayer, or as the Europeans say, Bayer, released aspirin in 1899, so it's only been around 125 years or so. Here's what the early labels look like. So it was Greek and French scientists who developed it, and there you can see the French and the I said German. I said Greek. I meant German. So there's German and French labels on those bottles. Here's an early American label, and I don't know whether you can read that. It says it's for headache, colds, neuralgia, lumbago, pain, rheumatism, terms we don't use anymore. Toothache. You can read it better than I can. So it's the most frequently taken drug in the world. It's truly a miracle drug. Now, I happen to be an orchid grower. You all know, of course, that vanilla is an orchid, right? Everybody knows that, okay. I happen to be an orchid grower. In fact, I volunteered for 17 years with the orchids at Missouri Botanical 1 day a week. And I have about 300 at home, which isn't really too many for a hobby grower, but I give a lot of talks and teach classes on orchids, and sometimes in orchid season when the orchid show is at the Botanical Garden, you'll hear me speaking there. I think I spoke 3 times this January there, or February rather. So, this is what the vanilla flower looks like. And that's a vanilla bean, which is really a seed pod, it's not a bean. So it's a tropical climbing orchid, and it can grow up to 100 feet high. This is obviously a commercial operation because in nature they grow up trees. Only orchid grown for food, 5.5 million tons consumed every year. Main use is flavoring ice cream and chocolate. Also used in perfume and flavoring tobacco. And of course, I mean, you can't bake a cake without, or cookies without adding vanilla. So, orchids are very complex in their pollination. And until these complexities were discovered, we really couldn't propagate them. So now they're hand pollinated rather than animal pollinated with a little wooden stick in each flower. This is what the seed pods look like. It takes about 6 months to a year, usually closer to a year, for that seed pod to mature on an orchid plant. And then they're dried for another 6 to 9 months in the sun, and they're wrapped in wool and fermented. And then they're cured in airtight metal containers, and then an alcohol extract is made. So you wonder why vanilla is expensive. It takes several years to from start to finish. So it's native to Mexico, and in 1519, the Spanish conquistador Cortez goes to Mexico and he meets up with Montezuma, who is the leader of the Aztecs. And Montezuma is drinking this wonderful drink out of a golden cup, and it is kind of a combination of chocolate, which we'll talk about later, and vanilla. And the Aztecs used this as an aphrodisiac and also to pay their taxes. That's kind of diverse. So orchids, their pollinator has evolved around with a flower, and it's like a lock and key. Only the anatomy of that particular pollinator fits into the anatomy of that flower. So just any old insect or spider or bird or what have you can't pollinate the orchid. It has to be that specific pollinator. And of course nobody knew that until the early 1800s. So when the Europeans said, well, we're taking this back to Europe, we're going to grow this stuff back there, couldn't do it. No pollinator to pollinate the flower. This is what the pollinator looks like. It's a little bee, native to Mexico. Today, most vanilla is grown in Madagascar and Indonesia. It's all hand-pollinated. So what do we get from the white mulberry? This might be another esoteric one. What do you think? Any ideas? Somebody's talking back there, but not loud enough for me to hear. We get silk. So, the Silk Road was a 5,000-mile trail established for safety reasons during China's Han Dynasty, or Han Empire. And it wasn't all camels or dromedaries. They also used elephants. They used pack horses. So it was a big deal. And there were actually more than one Silk Road, but this is the classic Silk Road. So it starts off in Byzantium, goes into the Mediterranean, and then through Arabia, Persia, and into China. So they could never leave those camels empty, you know. You have to have them full both ways. So going east to west, from China to Byzantium, they filled them up with silk, with tea, with paper, with spices, and with ceramics. And then going west to east, to China, they brought grapes, glass, incense, and cattle fodder. So, silk making was mastered by the Chinese over 4,000 years ago, made from the cocoon of the silkworm. It's the pupa phase, and there are 4 phases in these insects' development: the egg, and then the larva, and then the pupa, and then the adult. So it's made from the cocoon, which is the pupa of this moth, Bombyx morii, and there's the pupa. You can see the little silk threads around the outside of it. Here's the adult. I just think that's a cute little moth. I don't know about you, but I just think he's cute. So the silkworm larvae feed only on the leaves of the white mulberry. And this is true of so many plant larvae. I think the classic one we hear about now is what? The monarch butterfly. And we're told to be planting milkweed. Right. Well, this particular moth, its larvae, feed off of the mulberry. And there's what the larvae look like. So mulberry seeds and saplings eventually were taken to Persia, Greece, and Sicily, and to France in the 1400s. And I happen to have a personal story here. For the last 18 years of my career, I worked for a French company headquartered in Lyon, France, which in France is the silk capital of Europe. So I have many, many beautiful silk scarves. Here's an early print of Chinese women making silk. You can see the one with the baby on her back. But today, it is a big business. All those little white things are cocoons. Thousands, actually millions probably, of cocoons. You know what's interesting? When they pull that thread off of that cocoon, if they break it, it's no good. You have to pull that thread off of that entire cocoon in one piece. Okay, here's another one which you might not know, the sweet pea. And this has to do with genetics, the birth of genetics. So Gregor Mendel, did any of you take genetics in college? Okay, we have a few scientists in the room. Okay, so Gregor Mendel lived in much of the 19th century. There's his picture. He was actually an Augustinian monk. And he was from the Austrian Empire, which is now the Czech Republic. So he's working with peas, and he found that the traits are inherited independently of one another in pairs from each parent. So he presented his findings at a scientific meeting in 1865, and he's a contemporary of Charles Darwin, so this is right after Darwin published The Origin of Species in 1859. His work was ignored. So he dies thinking his entire lifetime research was amounted to nothing. What are we doing today with his research? All of our new medicines are based on genetics. It's taken this long. But I wish we could go back and tell him, don't you? So sweet pea is a native wildflower of the Mediterranean region. And in the 1600s, a Franciscan monk in Sicily found a sport, which is a mutation, and the seeds were sent throughout Europe, and more spores were found. This is an interesting thought. In 1900, the gardener at Althorp Park, which is the ancestral home of Princess Diana, produced this cultivar called Countess Spencer. So I think Diane is buried there at her ancestral home. This one's a little more evident, wheat. So bread, of course, is the staff of life. It's filled with vitamins, filled with minerals, starches, proteins, and it's portable and it's storable. Pack the power to feed the world. So 12,000 years ago, early hunter-gatherers in Southwest Asia and Ethiopia and the Mediterranean region harvested wild wheat. It was the first crop cultivated by Stone Age people. What's interesting about this, 5,000-year-old bread loaves were discovered in Egyptian tombs. But this early wheat, it wasn't ripe until the kernel fell to the ground. So in order to harvest the wheat, you had to grovel in the dirt and pick it up. And it took hundreds of years till they were able to develop a strain of wheat that would retain its seeds while it was still on the stalk. It's a grass, of course. But we don't have to grovel in the dirt anymore for the wheat. So wheat fields were growing in southeast England by 330 BCE. In about 2000 BCE, Rome invaded Sicily, Sardinia, North Africa, Egypt, and Spain, specifically to provide wheat for the empire. So in the Middle Ages, farming wheat through feudalism prevailed, and without wheat, Europe might still be stranded in the Dark Ages, because that age of exploration that we talked about earlier was made possible by wheat. So they could take their bags of wheat and they carry it, and these voyages took years, right? And they may be out to sea for months until there was a landing. So they could carry this wheat in the holds of their ship and make their bread and have something to eat in these long voyages. In 1793, we had the French Revolution, and what did Marie Antoinette is supposedly to have said? It's probably a myth, and if any of you are French, I don't want to offend you, because I work for a French company. I love French people. I love France. But this myth persists that when she was told that her subjects had no bread to eat, she said, "Let them eat cake." Probably a myth. So in the 19th century then, the cultivation of wheat spread throughout the temperate world. And we have the Industrial Revolution, which we talked about a little earlier. So now we take James Watts' steam engine and we can put it into this equipment that harvests the wheat. So we have a food revolution, that elevated America to being among the world's wealthiest nations. So steam power enabled the temperate regions of the world to fall before the plow. I just like that picture for some reason or other. So in the 20th century, and then we get the big things. So all of the processes of growing and managing, reaping wheat, etc., sowing, reaping, winnowing, and storing gave way to mechanization. I wonder how wide that piece of equipment is. Any guesses? I don't know. I could very well be. And you better be sure it's air conditioned too. So multinational corporations became among the wealthiest industrial dynasties. And then there's also a connotation of wheat and religion. So in the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Give us this day our daily bread." And the body of Christ in the Eucharistic ritual is bread. There's Da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper. And the Bible says, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry." It's another one we like, right? Coffee plants are so beautiful. They're very, very shiny. There's a lot of cuticle on the leaves, and they're just very beautiful. We grew some over at the Kemper Center at Missouri Botanical, and we harvested them, and we roasted them, and we made some coffee. But the flowers are pretty, too.
Was it good? Yeah, was it good? Yeah.
There was. Well, after all that work we did, whether it was or not, it was very pretty. And there's the, they call them coffee beans again. They're seeds. So, coffee is native to Ethiopia, which is the world's oldest country, the first Christian country, home to Africa's oldest Muslim settlement. Coffee goes back to the 13th century. Today it accounts for over 60% of Ethiopia's export earnings. So the monks of Ethiopia gave us the drink of coffee. Now, anybody know the legend of Caldi? Anybody ever drink at a Caldi's coffee house? There's one in Kirkwood. There's other one. Yeah. Did you ever hear of a coffee house when you were a kid? Me either. Okay. Well, this is what did you say? Somebody said something.
Greenwich Village.
Okay, Greenwich Village in New York. Great. So Caldi was an Ethiopian goat herd, and he was searching for his lost flock, and these goats were eating these red, quote, cherries on a certain bush. So Caldi tasted them, and he was invigorated. Whoa, so now they're having a big party. So he took them back to the monks, and the monks roasted them, and they brewed them, and now they're able to stay awake during prayers. So the Arabs guarded this secret about coffee, and that is that the bean is rendered infertile when the outer flesh is removed. And then we get into Marco Polo, and he was a Venetian, and he introduced coffee to the West in the 13th century. By the 17th century, the Dutch were growing coffee trees in glass houses. In glass houses, they use that term in Europe. We say greenhouses, same thing. So they shipped these saplings to India and Java to establish plantations, and they opened coffee houses that spread all over Europe. So what goes around comes around. Now they're very popular again. So the French brought the coffee tree to Martinique in 1720, and they started a whole industry there. Of course, Martinique is in the Caribbean. And the plant then spread to the West Indies, Central and South America, and to Sri Lanka, which is off the east coast of India. And coffee houses became political institutions, places to do business. The London Stock Exchange and America's first national bank sprang from coffee houses. And that plaque, which is on a building in London, says, on this site between 1680 and 1778 stood Jonathan's Coffee House, the principal meeting place of the city stockbrokers. There's the beginning of the London Stock Exchange. So the Boston Tea Party was planned in the Green Dragon Coffee House in 1773, and there it is. Did you ever think you were going to hear so much history? The universality of coffee consumption created third world economies dependent on the erratic nature of the trade. Coffee beans are very labor intensive. They have to be hand picked because they don't all ripen at the same time. So it made millionaires of manufacturers but paupers of its producers. I'm not picking on Maxwell House here, it just happened to be a picture that I found. But fair trade practices were established in the 1990s. And who do we have to thank for that? Starbucks in 2009 became the world's largest purchaser of fair trade coffee. So when you buy something at Starbucks, you know that your you're giving some money to those people who handpick those coffee beans. That's good. So today we have all those espressos, lattes, mochas, everything else, many, many kinds of coffee. Okay, tobacco. Pretty plant, isn't it? Pretty flower. Now, this person, Richard Sudell, there's a picture of him. He wrote the New Illustrated Gardening Encyclopedia in 1937, and he says, of all the produce of the earth, tobacco is the plant most universally loved by man. Here's a barn drying it, growing it. It rivals cotton as the world's most important non-food crop. It has no other competitor for courting controversy, but it remains a legal and popular poison. It was once heralded, however, as a miracle cure. Native to North and South America, first cultivated about 6000 BCE, Native Americans smoked it for medicinal and ceremonial purposes. Introduced into Europe in the 16th century, it was transported on returning slave ships. So those, just like the camels were never empty on the Silk Road, those slave ships were never empty either. They were full going in both directions. Now, this Frenchman, Jean Nicot, now we know where we get the word nicotine, right? He popularized its use as a medicine and to initiate sneezing, and that was called the Nicotian habit. Now, Jean Nicot was ambassador to France's ambassador to Portugal. Portugal was very, very much involved in the slave trade, and they had a colony in present-day Mali called Timbuktu, and that was where the slaves were taken and shipped across to this side of the world. So we had this Spanish physician, and he published this book, and he said that tobacco is a cure for 20 ailments. There's his picture. It cures migraines, it cures gout, it cures edema, fever, everything. So tobacco is a cure for everything. And then John Rolfe planted the first cultivated crop in Virginia in 1612, and by 1619, it only took 7 years, it became Virginia's biggest money crop. Now, John Rolfe married Pocahontas, and she was the daughter of Chief Powhatan, and they had one son named Thomas, and he took Pocahontas and his son back to England, and she died over there. He returned, and he died, according to this plaque, in 1622. He had a very short life. He was only in his 30s when he died. So, tobacco is used in different ways by different cultures. So the French use it as snuff, the Americans chew, Spanish smoked it as cigars, the British smoked it in pipes, and then of course we have the cigarette, the little cigar. And then in America, James Bonsack in 1880 patents a cigarette rolling machine, and now they can turn out 12,000 per hour. You don't have to roll your own. So by 1890, James Buck Duke, and that's a big North Carolina name, of course, controlled 40% of the American cigarette market. So he was the driving force in developing the U.S. tobacco industry. So when he died in 1925, his little daughter, Doris, she was only 12, and she was the richest little girl in the world. And here she is as an adult. Of course, you think of Duke University, of course. Today, according to the World Health Organization, 10 million cigarettes are sold every minute, and tobacco is killing 1 in every 10 people. How about that? Remember these ads? The Macho, the Marlboro Man. I think this one, the bellhop, I think this one goes back to the 40s even. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. A call for Philip Morris. And then we get the testimonials from physicians. Lucky's. 20,670 physicians say Lucky's are less irritating. It's toasted. And then the Camels. Smoke a fresh cigarette. And then we start marketing to women. That's Barbara Stanwyck. And now they're marketing king-size cigarettes and filter cigarettes. And I remember this one. You've come a long way, baby. Virginia Slims. I do too. Okay, cotton. King cotton. Of course, you know, before the Civil War, the South was very agricultural, the North was industrial. It was the catalyst for the Industrial Revolution, cotton was. And you had these big textile mills which were popping up in Britain. It was a mainstay of the slave trade, first domino to fall in America's Civil War. So, it's one of the most important non-food crops in the world. Slavery in America supported the economic boom of the cotton trade, a crop that depletes the soil. Today, cotton accounts for 3% of the world's farmland, but consumes 25% of the world's pesticides. Why? The boll weevil. So they have to use these pesticides to kill it. So, it's native to Asia, Africa, and North America. First woven into cloth 3,000 years ago. Well, you'd think that isn't really all that long. I guess we were in skins before that, huh? Animal skins. So, textile mass production started in Britain in the 18th century, and there's those factories. In America, Eli Whitney patents the cotton gin in 1794. Now you don't have to pull the seeds out by hand. In 1855, cotton is America's biggest export. Black African slaves comprised 50% of the population of the South. By 1861, the start of the Civil War, America was shipping over 4 million bales per year to England. After the Civil War, production shifted to other parts of the world, to China and West Africa. So, it isn't just used for textiles. Cottonseed is used to make soap, margarine, cooking oil, and the linter fibers, those are those little fibers around the seed used in cosmetics, sausage skins, dynamite, and bioplastics. So that's a good thing if we can have bioplastics. Cotton cellulose is used in ice cream, chewing gum, and as a fireworks propellant. Now, who would have thought? Okay, rice. It's native to Asia. Rivals wheat is one of the world's most important food crops. Oldest continuously grown cereal in the world. Grown in more than 100 countries. 4.6 million square miles of land planted in rice fields. Makes up 30% of the world's cereal production. So half of the world's rice is planted and harvested by hand. So it's seeded in nurseries and then planted after 4 weeks, and depending upon the variety of rice, takes 90 to 260 days to mature. Seeds 30 days after flowering. So who does the work? Well, the women plant and weed, and the men irrigate and plow. Both very dirty jobs. So the draft animal is the water buffalo. Now, there's 4 categories of rice. There's upland rice. I didn't know this before. Upland rice is grown on hillsides. Rain-fed rice is raised in shallow water. And then we have irrigated rice plugged into paddy fields. Apparently, this is very, very hard on climate change. these paddy fields. I was reading just in the last few days. Deep water rice is planted in estuaries. Look at these people. They're working up to their chest in brackish water. Can you believe that? So in America, it transformed the South Carolina landscape. Of course, this is before the Civil War. Covered thousands of acres in South Carolina from Cape Fear to the St. Johns River in Florida until the slave trade was lost after the Civil War. So in Asia, 90% of the world's rice is grown. Nowhere has rice so marked the landscape as in China. So there's a map of China, and everything that's green is rice growing, and the dark green areas are intensive rice growing areas. But there's this curious killer. So in the 19th century, saw a move in Asia from eating brown rice to white or polished rice. They didn't want to eat that brown stuff anymore, which we're told to eat today, right? Better for you. So what happened? They stripped off thiam and vitamin B1, and they all got beriberi. And I'm not going to show you any pictures. It says they get extreme fatigue and lethargy, but if you go in Google and put in beriberi, you're going to see the most gruesome pictures you've ever seen, what these people look like. So they didn't know about vitamins, of course, then. Okay, tea. So it's a small tree grown wild from India to China for over 4,500 years. Very pretty. Only the bud and 2 terminal leaves are picked by hand for premium tea, so there's no mechanization. Got to do it by hand. So it's known for its calming effect. And in processing tea, it's all the same plant. Whether you get oolong tea or green tea or black tea or white tea or whatever, it's all in the processing. So, green tea leaves are withered, rolled, fermented, dried, and grated. And then green tea is made by heating the leaf to arrest this blackening during fermentation. And black tea is made without the heating. And then there's the other kinds, which I'm not going to go into. But it's all the same plant. So this Chinese emperor Shen Yong, there's his picture, he discovered tea drinking in the exact year 2737 BCE. Now, I don't know who determined that, but I'll take their word for it. So the Chinese introduced tea to Japan via Korea around 800 BCE and to England in 1657. By the mid-1700s, Europeans were enjoying their tea. Western tea traders exchanged precious metals and later opium for Chinese tea. After 1850, we had these faster ships, these clipper ships, and there's the Cutty Sark. I think that's also the name of a Scotch, isn't it?
Yes.
I wonder what the connection is. Okay, and then they had steamships. So look at these steamships. I think those are hybrids. I drive a Prius, a hybrid. And they had the sails, but they also had the steam engine. So I think those are hybrids. So in the 19th century, Britain cleared land in Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, for tea production, and they displaced communities, destroyed ecosystems, but they could use that cheap labor from India. But it's very high quality tea. So today, Sri Lanka produces 1/3 of the world's tea. And if you can buy Ceylon tea, you're buying the best. But in America, in the 18th century, all North Americans loved their tea. Yet today, Canadians drink 4 times more tea than in the U.S. Any guesses?
Cost.
Cost? Any other guesses?
Technology.
Boston Tea Party.
Oh.
It's considered unpatriotic in the United States to drink tea.
Oh,
Okay, we got 2 more plants we're going to talk about. How could we skip this one, right? You just can't skip cacao. So chocolate is the food of the gods, and actually, When Linnaeus was inventing this system of taxonomy for plants and animals that we still use today, he called cacao Theobroma for its genus name, and that translates to food of the gods. Big, big seed pod. But it says here that this raw cacao regulates blood sugar, lifts your mood with bliss nutrients, supports weight loss by reducing your appetite. When I eat it, I just want more. I don't know. And it has heart and cardiovascular protection. And we say that's true if you can stop it, like 1 ounce of dark chocolate a day. It's good for your heart. So, it's a native of the South American rainforests. Born on a tree that lives for 80 years and grows 45 feet tall. Seeds are removed from pods and fermented beneath banana leaves and dried in the sun. Kind of reminiscent of the vanilla, isn't it? Well, Casanova in the 18th century was said to use chocolate in his seductions. One of the first products to be advertised. Think of how we're bombarded with advertising today. And, you know, a couple hundred years ago there was no advertising. Here's some of the early ads. Cadbury. We still have Cadbury's, don't we?
Yeah.
It was advertised as an aphrodisiac, a health food, an excellent diet for children and invalids. Food that gives staying power and nerve tone. I'm not sure what nerve tone is, but if somebody is a physician here, maybe he can or she can explain it to me. Here's some of the early ads. There we used Little Red Riding Hood. There's an early postcard. Chocolat au lait Suisse, milk chocolate. Now we start getting into the romantic aspect of chocolate. I mean, even Hershey's Kisses are romantic, you know. And there's hugs. Kohler cacao. So, the Aztecs made it into a festival drink called chacuatl to toast the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, and we talked about that earlier, the vanilla and the chocolate. Spanish conquistadors added sugar from the West Indies, which is another plant that changed the course of history, and they took it back to Spain. And Maria Teresa brought it from Spain to France in 1660 when she married Louis XIV. A Dutchman named Van Houten made it into cocoa in the 1800s. In the 1900s, 3 Quakers in Britain established chocolate factories, Fry, Rowntree, and Cadbury. If you look at what it says on that little boy's face, desperation, pacification, expectation, acclamation, and realization, it's Fry's. He goes from to There's an early chocolate bar. Cadbury's cocoa, absolutely pure. And then Lindt in Switzerland developed this process called Konken, which makes chocolate smoother in your mouth, kind of melts in your mouth now. It's not gritty. In 1894, Milton Hershey establishes a chocolate plant in Pennsylvania. It's a whole city, Hershey, Pennsylvania. A whole city. By 1905, it's the biggest chocolate factory in the world. This didn't take very long, did it? Here's how do you like this? More sustaining than meat, Hershey's sweet milk chocolate. Okay, how could we skip the lowly potato? So, it's native to the Andes in South America. can be grown anywhere in the world except low-lying tropical regions, high in starch, therefore higher food value than the cereal crops like rice and corn and wheat. All green parts are poisonous, however, so if you're peeling that, you need to cut it out. Possible to live on a diet of potatoes alone, which of course is what the Irish were doing. So think of the ways that you can prepare it. You can bake it, fry it, roast, turn it into soups and stews. You can process it into flour. You can make it into chips, or you can ferment it into vodka and schnapps. So, for over 4,000 years, Peruvians ate and actually worshipped the potato. The Spanish conquistadors brought the potato to Spain in the 1570s, and actually it was worth more than all that Inca gold and silver that they were seeking. So one legend says that Sir Walter Raleigh introduced the potato to England. And then there's another legend that says, no, it was Sir Francis Drake, and he was returning from Virginia in 1586, and he brought Virginia potatoes and he planted them in southern Ireland. So in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, there was religious tension and superstition over the potatoes. So potatoes were considered Catholic, and they were associated with popery. The Protestants said, the potato is not mentioned in the Bible, and therefore we're going to eat parsnips instead. And they also said, it's the work of Beelzebub, it has voluptuous curves, it has suggestive shapes, and it swells and it multiplies even when buried like a corpse in the ground. So Germany adopted the potato following a famine in Prussia in the mid-1700s. But despite famines, France was opposed to potatoes until Louis XVI planted a secret crop of pomme de terre, apples of the earth, at Versailles in 1770. Now, where do you think he put those potatoes? In those beautiful formal gardens. And I'm sure he wasn't the one who planted them. So in Ireland, the fate of one nation, Ireland, and the makeup of the population of another, the United States, was profoundly affected by the little tuber from South America. What happened? The potato blight. So it's caused by the fungus Phytophthora infestans. And since I'm a microbiologist, I have to show you what this fungus looks like microscopically. And this is what the potato fields look like. The plants, the potatoes, inedible, right? So the Irish potato famine lasted for 7 years, from 1845 to 1852. 40% of the population was dependent solely upon the potato. Now, they were growing other crops, but remember that Ireland at this time is part of England. And England is exporting those other crops and, in effect, forcing the Irish to live solely on the potato. 1 million died, 1 million emigrated. Population fell by 25%. Terrible pictures of these people starving. There they are coming over on the ship. So it permanently changed the island's demographic, political, and cultural landscapes. Eventually led to Irish independence from England in the 20th century. Of course, England still owns Northern Ireland. That's the last plant I'm going to talk about, but I'm also just going to list the ones that Bill Laws also talks about in this book. Agave, onion, pineapple, bamboo, wild cabbage, hemp, chili pepper, cinchona, which is used to make a malaria drug, sweet orange, coconut, cilantro, saffron, foxglove, yam, cardamom, coca, eucalyptus, soybean, sunflower, barley, hop, indigo, lavender, nutmeg, opium poppy, black pepper, English oak, dog rose, which was the original rose, crab apple, tulip, ginger, rubber, sugar cane, and corn. So those are the other ones in the book. So, I'd like to end with this quote of Thomas Jefferson, who said, "The greatest service which can be rendered to any country is to add a useful plant to its culture." And I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think you helped to open our minds.
Well, there's a lot of history there, and, you know, we're very dependent upon plants. That's lavender there.